into interprofessional research. I'll talk about an overview of interprofessional research, as well as some mentoring strategies. So I will thank all of this former ATSU students. Actually, some of them, I guess, are still current, who I've had the pleasure of working with and mentoring for their research journeys, whether it was a requirement of their program, such as a capstone project or an elective research opportunity. But it has been a pleasure to work with all of them, and some had greater successes we'll see than others in kind of what the end product was. And I think that actually plays into some of the roles that I've learned about working with students in other professions. So a little bit about my research journey. I grew up in Southern Ontario and always had an interest in medicine. And I was a high school athlete. And in Canada at the time, we did not have athletic therapists in our high schools. And I had a meeting with my guidance counselor who asked me, what I was going to do and if I had an interest in sports medicine. And I kind of said, what? Wait, like you can do medicine and watch sports at the same time? What is this? And he had a pennant on his wall for Mercyhurst College, which is now Mercyhurst University, where I first went. It is not a research-intensive institution. I did my undergraduate degree there, but I did several honors projects to get honors credits for classes that were normally not honors classes. And that really kind of started me working with some of the athletic training staff and others in biology and other departments that really kind of started that interprofessional research journey. I did my master's in kinesiology and applied physiology at the University of Colorado, where I held a teaching assistantship. And so my research here was more with exercise physiologists and biomechanists who were a little bit more science-based, less healthcare-based. And through that experience, I learned a lot about the research process and interprofessional collaboration in the research world, but it also made me miss athletic training. And so I detoured to New Hampshire and did a fellowship for a year with the New Hampshire Musculoskeletal Institute. And as part of that fellowship, I was required to do research. And so I collaborated with faculty at the University of New Hampshire, looking at post-ACL reconstruction, gait analysis, and a number of other factors. And one of the fellowship mentors, who wasn't directly involved with that research, said, if you really have a passion for research, you need to go to the University of Virginia and work with Dr. David Perrin. And he, in the athletic training world, is like the godfather of doctoral research level work in athletic training. And so I worked with him. My department of kinesiology was actually in the School of Education. So it led to a different spin in interprofessional. It wasn't just healthcare. It wasn't with exercise physiologists. It was now with faculty members in the Department of Education. And when I graduated from Virginia, my first faculty position was here. And I've been here since 2002. And over my time here at ATSU, it has really led me to a number of collaborations with faculty members in physical therapy, audiology, occupational therapy, and in soma. And so that has been really helpful from a collaborative standpoint with other faculty members, but has also led to a lot of the student mentoring opportunities that I've been given. Now, in addition to some of these collaborations, I have sought external collaborations, and one of the most influential has been the Pediatric Research in Sports Medicine Society. And this is an interdisciplinary, interprofessional organization that includes orthopedic surgeons, primary care sports medicine providers, athletic trainers, physical therapists, psychologists, occupational therapists, and I'm sure I am missing some others that really have an interest in engaging in research in pediatric sports medicine. So a lot of our large children's hospitals and academic medical centers are involved. And one of the things that PRISM does extremely well is develop research interest groups. And so they have research interest groups for the female athlete, for concussion, for sports specialization, for bone stress injuries. So it can get very specific. And each research interest group is extremely collaborative and interdisciplinary. Again, having individuals from all of these different healthcare backgrounds that really brings a lot of important considerations to the research process from the start to the end. We have clinicians who might see patients with a particular condition, but have no access to IRBs or statisticians. And so they can bring something to the table and talk about the research all the way from the study design and development about how it can the workflow and what might work in an actual physician practice to be able to actually collect this kind of data. And then we have biomechanists who do a lot of motion analysis, who really are kind of the statistician. They're also, well versed in stats. And so everyone can bring these different elements to the table. And one of the things that not necessarily related to this talk, but it definitely speaks volumes to ATSU, is I am often tasked for a lot of projects with securing the IRB because our IRB works so fast. And in some of those academic medical centers, it can take months to get an IRB approved. And so for not minimally risk studies, survey studies, I am kind of that tasked with that because they have learned how well ATSU works in that area. But in these research interest group, I've been involved primarily in concussion, where we have been very active with a lot of publications in these collaborative research teams with physicians and physical therapists and psychologists and a number of different healthcare providers, and also in sports specialization. And these have been just absolutely great networking opportunities. And so I think the more that individuals can find organizations of like-minded people, it can not only help them in their own research, but also in mentoring trainees and future healthcare providers. The other organization that is, I've only been involved for a couple of years, but the National Academies of Practice. There is an athletic training academy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech language pathology, veterinary medicine, nursing. And we have done some work. Last year, we did a webinar, a panel webinar with a number of different healthcare providers talking about current research for the management of concussion. And it was really great to see everyone's perspective and where everyone thought the research should go. We'll be presenting a poster this March talking about the athletic trainer's role in the interprofessional management of concussion. But my co-authors on this are many of those individuals from the webinar who are really passionate about this area. So it's kind of finding the right people to help foster your interest and listening to their perspectives. And the last area I want to talk about is not necessarily engaging in research or doing the research directly, but being involved as a professional consumer of research to make policy and healthcare policy decisions. And I'm involved with three different groups in this area. The first is our Arizona Interscholastic Association Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, where we look at health data to make informed policy decisions to protect the safety and health of student athletes in Arizona. So we are looking at data that's published across all healthcare disciplines. Some of our work with heat illness, even it reaches climate scientists. But we have to look at that to make policy rules as far as how long can athletes practice in August in Arizona with football equipment on. I'm also involved with USA Swimming Concussion Task Force. We have published a couple papers from this interdisciplinary group about concussion management in swimming. And you would think, swimming, really? But yes, it happens, but it is a little rarer. And they don't necessarily have the policy infrastructure that something like football does. I also serve on the NFL's Head, Neck, and Spine Committee, and all we do is review data and make decisions about whether or not policies or rules should be changed, and we make recommendations to the NFL's Competitive Safeguards Committee that oversees their rules. And so I've seen this from kind of multiple angles, why interprofessional research groups are extremely important, not only in conducting research, but also in consuming research and using it to make informed healthcare policy decisions. So what are we talking about with interprofessional research? I think we're all well versed with interprofessional education as a key component of training healthcare providers. The literature is very strong that IPE can help enhance patient outcomes, and it's really supported by a lot of evidence. But interprofessional research is lacking in the literature as to the benefits, as to how it can improve researchers, clinicians, as well as patient outcomes, which is typically our ultimate goal with any kind of research. And the NIH has kind of termed this team science. And if you look at that top graph, that shows the number of publications with multi-author teams and in both science and engineering and the social sciences. And you can see back in kind of 1959, 1960, only 10% of social science papers had more than one author. It was single people publishing things. It was a little higher in the sciences and engineering, and now we see it much higher. In fact, from 2000 to 2013, when this last NIH report was published, it increased from 80% of publications to 90%. In the bottom graph, it is looking specifically at publications with one author versus 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 10, and then in increments, and some with, close to 1,000 authors. So those are going to be, I think, our big consensus and position statements and that sort of thing. But what we see over the last several years is that most publications are by author teams of 6 to 10 individuals. And that really allows for scientific collaboration and letting individuals bring their own expertise to the table that is extremely helpful, especially when we start talking about mentoring the next generation of healthcare researchers, our students. This is also from the NIH report, really just kind of talking about the levels of cross-disciplinary integration. Unidisciplinary is when we have our researchers from a single discipline who work together to address a common problem. And not all of my work is at those higher levels. I do a lot of unidisciplinary research with the athletic training faculty here in mentoring some of the athletic training students across all of our programs. It really just depends on the topic and the purpose and what we're doing from a research standpoint. Multidisciplinary research is when we have researchers from different disciplines, each making separate contributions in an additive way. Interdisciplinary is defined as researchers integrating information, data, techniques, tools, perspectives, concepts, and theories to advance fundamental understandings to solve problems. And then our highest level is transdisciplinary, where researchers integrate and also transcend disciplinary approaches to generate fundamentally new frameworks, theories, models, and applications. And so when we think about this, we need to think about this continuum. And every research question might fall at a different level on this scale. Now, team science is critical, and the NIH talks about it from the standpoint that, we all can't be an Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein was a physicist, but he also studied math and other areas that he brought into his own research, especially the theory of relativity. And so since we're not all Einsteins, we really need to kind of identify others that can help us. And team science really helps because of the rapid growth of specialized knowledge across all of our fields. And it allows us to obtain complementary expertise that can only assist us in our science. And so the dimensions of team science can really vary. And I think that's important to know because not every research question or research project is going to need a team of 15 people. But some of the dimensions that we need to think about are the diversity of the team, group, or membership. And that can range from being a homogeneous group from the same discipline to a heterogeneous group from multiple disciplines. Thinking about disciplinary integration from unidisciplinary through that spectrum to transdisciplinary. Teams or group sizes could be just two collaborators up to thousands working on some huge multi-site studies. The goal alignment can be aligned all the way through divergent or misaligned. The permeable team and organizational boundaries could be pretty stable. That this is a group that has worked together for a while. Everyone kind of knows their role to it's fluid. Depending on what we're studying, it moves. And I found the PRISM research interest groups to really be fluid, depending on what kind of a project we are working with. And right now, the concussion research interest group has 6 or 7 ongoing projects. And not every member is involved in every project. Some people lead projects, some people collaborate with being an individual who enrolls patients. Others are doing other elements. And so there's some fluidity into how that group works and what they do. The proximity of a team or group members. They can be co-located, like on one of our campuses. They could be globally distributed. And then the interdependence of tasks can be very low or very high. So all of these things really need to be taken into account when developing a research team and identifying how this group is going to work together and what everyone is bringing to that table as far as what that team looks like. Now, team science or interprofessional research has a lot of benefits. It can facilitate publication. It can facilitate publication across a multitude of journals. With some of the research interest groups that I've been involved with, we have a lot of conversations about who is our ultimate consumer. Do we want to submit this to an orthopedic journal, to a public health journal, to an athletic training journal? And in some ways, those conversations are actually quite insightful in seeing how every member of the research team thinks about how we should disseminate this information and who really needs this information the most. It can help with retention of faculty members who engage in these groups that really feel like they bring something to the table. They're part of a collaborative interprofessional group and can promote career satisfaction, particularly for some underrepresented faculty. Now, there can be a lot of barriers. A couple of studies that I had found in preparing this really kind of identified the number one barrier is the one I actually have listed last, and that's institutional barriers. Either the culture of the institution is not really set up to foster interprofessional research, or there's financial barriers or other kinds of barriers. Other concerns that were brought up in some of these articles are varying professional perspectives, either on research or on a particular topic, individuals bringing in their own biases, theoretical differences in how that discipline maybe approaches research or approaches a certain condition that a group might be studying. Lack of knowledge of what other healthcare providers are and what other disciplines are. And I think in some cases, it's probably a little less of an issue. If you say, I'm a physician, everyone kind of understands what being a physician is and that you're a doctor and that you are doing so much. If I introduce myself and say I'm an athletic trainer, at least 50% of the people think I am working at the gym down the street doing fitness programs, and they don't understand that athletic training is different than personal training, that we are healthcare providers who deal with everything from emergent on-site emergency care through rehabilitation and return to sport, activity, duty, work, depending on who our patient population is. And so that can be a big barrier, I think, in initially getting groups to work together. And then communication can always be a barrier in any type of research or interprofessional collaboration. So I'm going to segue a little bit and talk about mentoring, because that is a key element when you're working with students from other disciplines. And when we think about mentoring, there's a number of different domains in the research world where we might need to mentor someone. And there are other areas that maybe they're extremely proficient in as well. But some of the areas that have been studied and really aimed to try to improve through mentoring, various mentoring programs, are critical thinking and knowledge, management of the research process steps, data collection and analysis, communication of research findings, ethical and professional competence, research assessment, relational aspects, and continuing education. And so all of these are, I think, are important areas. And when we start to talk about initiating conversations with prospective mentees, it's getting a sense of what do they want to get out of this relationship, and what domains perhaps are they looking to build or foster through this collaboration. So successful mentoring is often a reciprocal model based on mutual respect and shared common values, with clear communication on the needs, goals, and expectations of both the mentor and the mentee, as well as ensuring that there's adequate time and methods for meaningful connections between the mentor and the mentee. Whereas unsuccessful mentoring often results from poor communication, a lack of commitment to the mentorship, personality differences, conflicts of interest, and in some cases, the mentor's lack of experience, and maybe not learning how to be a mentor, could also play a role in this process being unsuccessful. So kind of the roadmap that is important to consider is, first, from the mentor standpoint, recognize the meaning and responsibility of being a mentor, and thinking about how you're going to communicate, and identifying all of the areas outlined, from clear and realistic expectation, prioritization, identification of collaborators, constructive and timely feedback. And considering our students these days don't necessarily like to talk on the phone. So are there other forms of communication that we might need to use with them? Or if we have a lab group together, how are we going to communicate? Thinking about kind of the environment, really understanding, the need for professional behaviors, equal treatment, social opportunities, ensuring the mentees have a sense of belonging within your lab group or your scientific community. Thinking about the time to invest. Having a student mentor helping with research is not pushing all of what you would be doing onto them and just having them be a worker bee. It's really aiming to meet their goals and expectations, but also your own goals and expectations as well. And so these are all just important things to consider. One of the most insightful things I found in preparing for this was this article by Polling that was developing interprofessional research guidelines for healthcare students. And in doing these, they adapted them from the core competencies for interprofessional collaborative practice, which is a document from the American Association of Colleges of Nursing. And the IPR guidelines are really meant to serve as a guiding principle that serves as a foundation to direct research by providing ethical and professional constructs and elements. It was really developed by this one institution to have a structured approach for interprofessional teams to conduct research and include students. And so with this, their guidelines were really to maintain the interests of all stakeholders as the center of IPR, specifically patients. So if in the research that they're doing, it can always come back to how is this going to help patients in the end? Defining, establishing appropriate ways to communicate with each other, recognizing and respecting the roles and responsibilities and expertise of each member, use the unique and complementary abilities of every team member to optimize IPR, establish effective methods of coordination, collaboration, and communication, actively engage all team members in problem solving, demonstrating high standards of ethical conduct compliance with regulations and quality of care, using best available evidence to guide effective teamwork and research, developing consensus on methodology. This can often be a struggle for interprofessional teams because people from different disciplines might be coming at the methodology differently. One of our postdoctoral research fellows that we had a couple of years ago, his background was psychology, and his expertise was in qualitative methodology, which I've done a little bit of, but not necessarily my forte. And so really having a lot of conversations about how we could do some mixed methods projects using the quantitative research that I'm familiar and comfortable with, but his want and need for a deeper dive through qualitative methodologies. We had some extremely fruitful discussions on how should we move forward with some of these, and had some really nice projects kind of come out of it. Having guidelines for how we're disseminating research and disseminating it back to all stakeholders. I think we're all at fault sometimes that at the end result of our research, we get a presentation at a professional meeting or a publication, and there's no connection back to all of those patients with concussion that I used in my study as to what I actually found. And so I think in general, we need to do a much better job of dissemination, and then translating research results into practice. It takes 15, 17 years for research to commonly become routine in practice. How can we be more efficient in doing that? And incorporating healthcare students throughout this process and making them collaborators in the problem solving, in the consensus meetings, in how we should translate this can certainly be a bonus to the student. So some strategies for mentoring students across disciplines. The first is learning about each other, emphasizing cross-disciplinary communication, just understanding the basics of other disciplines. Some of the programs in ASHES do a really good job in the fall semester where they have someone from all of the other programs come into a class and talk about what are the roles and responsibilities of an athletic trainer? How does that relate to physical therapy or audiology or occupational therapy? But just that basic level of understanding what these other disciplines do, what their scope of practice is, can be critical in helping to kind of get over some of those humps that there might be early on in some of these collaborations. I don't know how many times I've said communication in this presentation, but it's a critical element of mentoring and of interprofessional research. Creating a collaborative research environment and encouraging holistic research approaches are critical elements. We know that healthcare is inherently interdisciplinary. It includes basic science, it includes clinical sciences. So we need to ensure that students are able to see the value of integrating knowledge from various fields in developing research methodologies. We need to guide our students on research design and methodologies, teaching them to adapt the methods to context. Healthcare research often follows rigorous evidence-based methods, but students might have some other experiences, other disciplines might have ways that they would want to approach it. I think the qualitative versus quantitative is an easy kind of example there, but thinking about how might we want to adapt our research models. And then introducing evidence-based practice, obviously incorporating the best available evidence into our methodology from not only a science background, but also from a social science element. Mentoring students on ethical considerations is important. If we're doing retrospective chart reviews or something like along those lines, we really need to be cautious. If they do come across any protected health information that should have been stripped before the chart review began, we also want to promote cultural competency. Encouraging students how to think about their research can impact diverse populations, and the importance considering cultural, social, and economic factors in healthcare. We want to provide resources for our students, help them understand relevant literature. The ATSU library has amazing LibGuides that they have put together for every step of the research process. And so when I start with a new student who comes to me from SOMA who's interested in a research elective, we spend some time going over that. So when I'm talking about you need to do a mini literature review, there's not a deer in the headlights look of what, I don't even know where to start. I share that information. I didn't have to create it. Thankfully, our library did that, but it's a great place to just really start. And then introducing them to databases and tools to help facilitate that literature review that they might need to do. Constructive feedback on writing drafts is probably one of the most important things. Making sure that your criticism is constructive. I often, will have kind of larger comments that really kind of focus on bigger picture issues with writing the introduction of a manuscript or drafting the IRB protocol. But then also kind of have the nitty gritty of the grammar and everything else that goes along with that. So help with academic writing is critical, ensuring that they're kind of understanding the process and how academic writing differs a little bit from perhaps some of the other writing that they do. I've noticed over the last couple of years, students often write in a conversational tone, maybe, that's not necessarily completely science-based, but so we have a lot of, constructive comments on how to improve that, and not be writing with you guys and things like that in their IRB protocol. And then encourage practical application. Have students think about how their research can translate into real-world healthcare practice. What are the implications for their own discipline and perhaps cross-discipline? And then support community engagement. And that's something that ATSU is extremely well known for in our community engaged research projects. But ensuring that, if you're working with some outside groups, that there's that back and forth conversation there as well. And for some students, the research that they're doing here might be kind of the first in what they hope is a long line of future projects. And so supporting their career and professional development can be important, sharing research networks with them, helping them identify ways that they might disseminate. And this can really be beyond our typical conference presentation or publication, but getting them to think about infographics and social media GIFs and things like that. In our Doctor of Athletic Training program, as part of their Cubify showcases, we have all of our students do a 1-minute elevator pitch, where they have to really describe their project start to finish. What does it mean in lay terms? You met someone at the bus stop. They want to know what you did for your research. How quickly can you do that? We have them either do an infographic or a GIF because we want to translate things out to the public. Our department has very active social media to highlight our student research. And so we're getting them to think outside the box a little bit in how they disseminate. I will say the one thing about professional development is that I've also mentored students here that it's a one and done. They are doing this because it's a required part of their professional program. They have absolutely no interest in research. And so, thankfully, we have those conversations early on. And so I know that my job is to get them to good enough to complete their capstone or whatever it is that they need. And then there's other students that go kind of beyond and work towards the conference presentations or the publications. We need to consider our students' learning styles and backgrounds, acknowledge the expertise that they bring to the table. Um, in my work with concussion, I have worked with students that have been college athletes, and they bring their own personal lived experience with concussion to our project. And so making sure that I don't push their thoughts aside and saying, well, no, that's really not what the literature says. But understand that, in some cases they have experienced a concussion, and that really is what got them interested in this as a line of research. And so ensuring that I'm hearing them and incorporating their thoughts into what we're doing has been something that I've really learned how to do, as well as personalizing mentorship. I have some students that check in with me literally every week. We have a standing meeting, and if for some reason, they don't need to meet, we'll cancel it. I have other students that I have worked with that maybe I hear from every couple of months because they are now in their third or fourth year of medical school, and they have so many things going on, and the projects kind of move extremely slow. But having conversations ahead of time as to what they want to get out of it, how are they going to work, really kind of just sets those expectations. So if I only hear from them every so often, I'm not worried. It's just that's kind of how we're working on this particular project. Um, and then lastly, cultivating a growth mindset, encouraging curiosity and open-mindedness, which should really be, what we want with all students in research, and then fostering resilience. I've dealt with a lot of students who, thought their initial manuscript was great, but we all know what happens when you get reviewer comments back, and we've had to kind of walk them back from the ledge a little bit in that this happens to everyone. I don't know how many times I give examples of, I send things to our own internal scientific writer that I think are good. And what I get back from Deb tells me that it's not good. And I think we've all had those experiences, but they're learning experiences, and they're things that we really take to kind of help improve what we're doing from a research standpoint. So I liked this. I saw this from AHRQ, and really kind of qualities of good research mentors, being respectful, supportive, available, prepared, and honest. Now, some of the challenges that I have come across in students that I've worked with, probably the one most often is, I have a student who comes to me who wants to do something with concussion, and they, want to study the brains of retired NFL players. And I'm like, well, that's a great project, but we don't have access to that. So sometimes their ideas are not super realistic. They, have a lack of understanding of what might require funding, what resources we have here at ATSU, or available data. I really, with a lot of first-time mentees, really suggest some kind of secondary database analysis to really just make it feasible for them to actually do a project from start to finish, and understanding what kind of data might be available to them. I also have had some challenges with students, whether they're on campus versus off campus. A lot of times, more so with the medical students, that I meet them, they're on campus, we work together kind of for 6 months while they're on campus, and then they go off to their CHC where they had been doing, their second through fourth years. And they have so many other things going on that it's often been challenging to keep them engaged with the project. And so that can be a concern as well. Time management, there's a lot of things happening. Students are studying for boards or different exams at different times of year and in different years of their program. They have a lot going on, and especially when they choose to engage in research either as an elective or just something that they're interested in because they want to get it on their CV for whatever that next step is, that can be problematic with some of those competing interests. And then, a waning interest level. I have had some students that I had worked with that were very gung-ho on their project. It was an in preparation on their CV. And then once they went through their residency interviews and they already had a residency lined up, their interest in doing anything else with the project at that point had really waned, which is, you know, somewhat unfortunate, but again, you can't force research on everybody. Some of the successes. I've had, you know, a fair number of students that not only take their project to completion, whether it's for their degree, for the capstone, or whatever's required in their program, but they've moved forward to disseminate it. And I've also had students that have really enjoyed the process. And while they have said to me, you know, I'm never going to become a researcher, I think going through the process, having a good experience, only will make them appreciate the research that they're reading when they're working kind of in their clinical roles and really understanding how hard it is. And when you see a research paper come out, that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to kind of get it to that point. And I'm going to share some of my successes. These are two papers from PA students that I mentored for their capstone project, both on concussion. Melanie is a current PT student, and this was a project that she did outside of her capstone. Her capstone is a different concussion project that we are working on, but she really just had an interest in the topic of how do we inform or recommend what should be done to patients in regards to driving a vehicle once they sustained a concussion. And so she did a really nice evidence to practice review that was just published last month. And then this is from her PT capstone. She'll be presenting it at the combined sections meeting in a couple of weeks. And then Justin DeSanti was one of our postdoctoral research fellows in the Department of Interdisciplinary Health Sciences. He was the individual who had a background in psychology, so not athletic training, not really any of the other health professions that we have at ATSU, but really kind of brought his psychology background to help us with looking at quality of life after injury in athletes. And I just want to end with some advice for students. So if you have students that kind of come and talk to you about their interest in research or working with a faculty member in a different department, you know, advice for students is to really start with their own interest and goals. What do they want to get out of the research experience? Leverage their existing network. This can be faculty members, this can be clinical contacts that they have. Get involved, attend interdisciplinary events and seminars, read, explore related research publications, reach out thoughtfully to prospective mentors, demonstrate a genuine interest in the work, be open to different mentorship arrangements. I've had to change, you know, how I mentor if I'm working with a student for a year on campus and now they're off campus, and how we kind of arrange from going to face-to-face meetings to virtual meetings and things like that, navigating time zones. Highlight the benefits of interdisciplinary research, be patient and flexible, maintain professionalism and respect, and look for mentors who encourage growth. So that's all I have, and I would love to get feedback from others who've maybe mentored people, students, or even faculty outside of their discipline, or answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so very much, Dr. McLeod. This was beyond, this was like Christmas come twice to us with all the frameworks you shared and the science behind this whole agenda. So, as Dr. McLeod said, do we have any questions? We do have one question from Dr. Freeman, which was posted a long time ago. He asked if you would be familiar with the text title Engage Scholarship, authored by Dr. Andrew Van de Ven.
I am not, but I am going to look into it now.
Any other questions or feedback?
I have a question.
Yes, of course, Dr. Morgan.
Thank you so much for that informative presentation. I really appreciate it. In working with students, one of the things I've struggled with is submission for publication and authorship, especially when a student has graduated and perhaps they were the lead author and now they've graduated and they're no longer in touch with you, but you have this manuscript. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I with at least with all of my typically with my athletic training students that I mentor, that's actually a conversation we have before they graduate. Is, we've gotten you to the end of your research requirements. When we had our residential master's program, they had to do a formal thesis defense. You've defended your thesis. I think this could go to publication. Do you still want to be involved? And if so, at what level? And I've had many students that have continued on, and as long as they're my general rule, as long as they're communicating with me, and are actually reviewing and doing things like that, I let them be the lead author. I have had students who have sat in my office and are like, "I'm done. Do what you want with it." But it's I have those conversations before they do leave, because they take a new job, their email address changes, they don't respond. And in those cases, I have reached out a couple of times and then will usually flip author order because I can't just justify them not being involved further, and still being the lead. But conversations ahead of time have been the best way for me.
So I have a question. One of the things that I struggle with is, well, I have two research interests. One is in lymphology. I like lymphatics and everything, but I really want to tie it in more with orthopedics, and that's really a niche kind of a thing to actually be able to do. Trying to find people or interested in how to control edema, looking at lymphatics is hard to find when people don't know how important lymphatics are in decreasing edema. And so, I don't know who to reach out to begin projects like that from the orthopedic side. I can spend all day doing research projects on lymphedema, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking
Mhm.
about acute, subacute edema in orthopedic, sports medicine, and things like that. So those are the things like how do you get that? Where do you seek that interest, and how do you get that started? And of course, part of that is having the population. And you were talking about all these different populations that the groups of people, swimmers and things like that. Like there's already this hub of people that you can do some kind of assessment on. And those are the things that I would need too. So that's kind of where I have all kinds of research ideas.
Mhm.
Would love to get students involved, but I don't want to start something if I can't find the population or interest in things like that. And that's kind of where I'm stuck.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of avenues to consider. The first from an ASHA's faculty, they put together that the FAME Kenny just sent out the email to have us all update our profiles, right? So all of our
Right.
research profiles are already in that on that website. So that would be step one. I think step two is looking at is there something within the PT interest groups or the specialty certification groups in looking at orthopedics and who's involved there, and is there perhaps someone that you can reach out to who might be able to suggest. And then the third is if you're doing some literature searches, and seeing something kind of similar being published by someone, is stalking them on LinkedIn and maybe reaching out to them and trying to see if they would have an interest in collaborating. So I think there's kind of, internally within your professional organization, and then if there's some, cross-disciplinary organizations that would also be helpful in seeing who's publishing in that area.
So that's an interesting point because there are some literature out there that does start to talk about this. The concern is obviously it's not in Arizona. We're talking about people that are maybe in Massachusetts, right?
Mhm.
So what has been your experience with doing research with people across the continent and trying to actually facilitate some kind
Yeah,
of
It depends on what the research question is. For the concussion, the scope project within Prism, people were collecting data at different sites. We were all using the same methodology. We were using a standard IRB. That IRB was run through University of Colorado Medical Center. With MOUs. So there can be a lot of legwork up front depending on how different IRBs, work. But that was a completely unfunded study that, we had that standard methodology. So it can be doable. You can also consider models where one site focuses on data collection and other people are collaborators with bringing in different expertise to either help analyze the data or something along those lines, if that's easier to kind of manage some things, at one site. It really, kind of depends on who's involved. But I do research with people all across the country all the time. And I have collaborators in Canada, that, our biggest hiccup is, trying to figure out the best time to meet because everyone's in a different time zone. But it really hasn't hindered our ability to complete projects.
Thank you.
Hi, Anne.
Hi, thanks for a great presentation as always. I was thinking about and really appreciated your comment about challenges across institutions. So one of the things I've been involved in through my professional organization is trying to get a bigger bang for the buck from research that graduate students do. So if you have a professional organization that has a strategic plan, could you have graduate student across multiple programs studying the same question, but representing their geographic area.
Mm-hmm.
And the roadblock is always, well, we don't have a mechanism to do that kind of thing across our institutions, or people can't quite figure out how to share the resources, or what are the regulatory hurdles. And we have so many interested people and vested parties, but it's the failure to launch is on the side of the institution.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that is real versus imagined, right?
Yep.
Because they've never done it before. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. Like you, I have found I've had best success with people who are really invested and are more experienced at being able to move the needle. But anyway, I was just wondering about your
Yeah,
thoughts.
I agree. I'd have to go back to kind of, to that study that kind of listed those institutional factors as to, whether or not, because it was more of a perception study. So the perceived barriers versus, yeah, it takes a little bit of work, I don't know that, our IRB likes to have to run through a number of business associate agreements and MOUs and everything, but for projects like that, that's how it gets done. So you have to, rock the boat a little bit, or, kind of work through some of that. And I think if you're really determined to do it, it's just keep knocking on the doors.
Yeah, and I think actually ATSU is pretty well positioned for some of that, because we have such great template documents and template contracts that can really facilitate that, compared to some other institutions where I've been on faculty where it's a much bigger hurdle.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.